How does God deliver out the front door here in this world? How does God deliver his promises to his people? How does God deliver the goods to the world and to his children? Food, clothing, his word, help. How does he deliver all those things? Is it through pixie dust? Diana loaned me a couple of vials of pixie dust. Is it through pixie dust that God throws his little pixie dust out and all of a sudden things just show up on a table? We from time to time see showers of pixie dust coming from the heavens, and we know that God is providing food for somebody. Is that it? Wizards and whatnot are big these days. How about wands? We as a church have incantations, and we stand on a big rock cliff and we say these words with a wand, and all of a sudden food shows up in Haiti. It just rains from the sky, or we have boxes of food going here or there. We just wave our wand and then it just shows up. Is it by magic wands that God delivers his goods to his people? I don't think so. When we come into church, let's say today, and we see these sacks in the back of the church, these are going to help deliver food to hungry families over Thanksgiving. These things just kind of show up, right? You come to church, and as the weeks go by, all of a sudden sacks just begin to show up in the back by a little fairy that comes, or a little troll, and they come in over the week and they just put food here. That's how it works. Just dropping from the skies, maybe. Or, this is great. These angel tree gifts, they just kind of disappear. We put them on the table with gifts, and all of a sudden, every Sunday, there seem to be less of them. I don't know who's doing it, but they just kind of disappear. It must be God who sends angels to pick these up throughout the week so that they're gone. I don't know if that's it either. Or, how about this? Operation Christmas Child, where we make boxes to go overseas. Because one of the best ways that God gets his stuff to people is these magical overseas organizations that are in other towns that somehow have the funding and the stuff they need to deliver these goods. It's other big, powerful, smart organizations that do all this. Is that how God gets his stuff to his people? Or delivers the gifts to the houses because we need drivers. It is in answering this question of how God delivers the goods that we find the heart of giving. Through the month of November, we're going to be talking about stewardship. And if you have a chance to read the beginning of the new newsletter that's sitting in the back and has been emailed out to those of you who gave us your email address on Friday, there's a little article in there that I put there. And we don't have time to cover it because it's Communion Sunday. We got to move along. I get that. Stewardship is one of the most martyred subjects of our faith. We have been beaten up with stewardship. We have been taken down paths we ought to have gone, to the point where many organizations are just confused to death about what stewardship is. They think it's about time, talent, and treasure. Oh, that is totally wrong. Stewardship is about something else. And we're going to cover that this month. Starting with giving. We run into an incident with Paul today as we read. These Macedonians are on the diaspora. It's a fancy word for on the edge of the Christian faith in the New Testament. Now, I have been a financial counselor for almost 20 years now. I can't believe it's been that long. I had to write a bio about this when I went down to the national conference, and I didn't think I was that old. 20 years I've been doing this very quietly and very busily at this church because people don't like people to know that they're struggling. And so we work a lot of time with people in our church. And over those 20 years I've begun to learn some people see one thing as poor, some people see other things as rich. But when we talk about the Macedonians, they were poor. This is barely had enough for clothes. They had enough food to survive for that day or week, and they had basic shelter. Now, Paul is dealing with this collection. And I don't know, George, I've asked him before, if anyone else, maybe I missed it in the scriptures, does Paul ever smile? Have you ever read about Paul laughing in the New Testament? Or even cracking a joke? Paul is a pretty austere individual, but you see in Paul in our reading today in 2 Corinthians an almost giddy character. What is he so giddy about? He's talking about stewardship, giving, okay? That's a subject that's, you need to give, you people. Why is Paul giddy about this passage? Why is he talking to the Corinthians in this way? What is going on? Well, the Macedonians have figured out the heart of giving. And Paul begins to lay it out as he teaches these Corinthians, this, middle, upper class group. Maybe they had 2 campuses, I don't know. A group of Corinthians about what it meant to have the right heart to give. Because it's not like we've really heard of late what stewardship is all about. And so we begin to read in 2 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul approaching the Corinthians, wanting to teach them, hey, this is what giving is all about. This is where the heart of it begins. And he starts with this collection. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. So you have Paul bringing up this example to the Corinthians. Listen up. This is being done. This is where it's being done. And out of their poverty, they're pulling this off. What are they pulling off? What's going on here? It is about the collection. When the first New Testament people really started getting together and organized, they devised a plan. What if we supplied food to the hungry people? What if we provided shelter and food for the hungry and the needy people? Well, if we do that, we won't need welfare. If the churches did their job, we wouldn't need food stamps. If the churches did their job, kids would have clothing and a good education. That's if the church does its job. Otherwise, we need other entities to do it for us if we lay back and not do this. So the early church right away figured out this is part of what God has called us to do. And for those who have just come to Christ and begin to understand what He is about, they were elated to do it. And they worked it out in communities. Johannine communities is another example. So we can go on and on and on. But it's Communion Sunday, we got to move. And so we read in here, Paul is advising the Corinthians about this collection that will be used to support people around the community. We move to our first point. Moving to verse 3. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord. They began to realize one of the first points of giving, that God provides for us and His people through our daily bread. We pray it every Sunday, and if we've done our work right, you pray it every day when you're at home and out and about. What do we pray? Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. What's the next bit? Give us this day our daily bread. What comes before the bread in the prayer? What do we need to have first? God's will in our life. If we do not understand God's will, what's the point of all the resources? God provides the daily bread to fulfill His will. That's how it works. God gives you everything you need to live every single day, and God chose one day at a time. Our daily bread, not our monthly, yearly bread. Our daily bread, He provides. What type of things does He provide? Well, I go to our Luther Small Catechism. If you don't like Luther, if you don't like the word catechism, rip off the front page and say it was written by Justin Bieber. I don't care. Just go to this document and read it. There's a lot of good stuff in it, okay? Just rip off the front page if you don't like those names. And continue to read on. This is what it says about the Apostles' Creed, the first article. I believe that God has made me and all creatures, that He has given me my body and soul, eyes and ears and all my members, my reason and all my senses, and still takes care of them. He also gives me clothing and shoes, food and drink, house and home, wife and children, land, animals, and all I have. He richly and daily provides me with all that I need to support this body and life. He defends me against all danger and guards and protects me from all evil. All this he does only out of fatherly divine goodness and mercy, without any merit or worthiness in me. For all this it is my duty to thank and praise, serve and obey him. God is providing you, through this daily apportionment, everything you need to live. Everything. And it's good to remember who the founder of the feast is. The Macedonians knew that. They finally realized that this stuff all belongs to God. You'll find a Deuteronomy passage in your bulletins as well where it says, the earth and everything in it, including heaven, belongs to the big guy. You think you own anything here? With a Christmas-like chuckle, he looks upon us. God is providing this to you. And when we understand where the source comes from, then we can move on to the next verse. What's going on? We read in verse 4. Begging us earnestly, okay, let me go back a verse so it makes sense. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord. Begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the wreath of the saints. The interesting thing here isn't that they gave, it's that they begged to give. How many customers come into your office, unless you're a bank, begging for what you have, begging to want to give you money? We have some incredible individuals at this church that do give and give and give. But we don't have a rush of people begging to want to give to help our ministries. They begged. They couldn't wait to help because you know what they realized? This is a very big point for us in order to understand the heart of giving. God delivers his promises not through pixie dust, which is kind of cool, pixie dust, magic wands, magical foreign organizations that just seem to do it somehow. How does he deliver the goods? It is through you. God brings his word, his message to the people through you. God delivers his promises to his children through you, through us. There is a due to our faith. And when we understand that God has given you a portion of daily bread for you to live on, but there is also, for many, an excess. God has promised that he would provide bread, clothing, and shelter, and basic health. I won't get into that. We don't have enough time. Basic needs, and everything above and beyond that is for the will of God in the community and the world around you. But unless we know that will that he has planned for you in your life, it's difficult to know how to use the resources. It's about his plan for you and his children. Again, I have done many years of financial counseling, personal financial counseling. It's personal is exactly what it is. It's personal. And I was working with one individual, and he's given me permission to use his first name in the story. That's it. I tried to get him to come up here and say this. He isn't going to do it. Okay? His name is Jeff. He's in his lower 30s now, and at the time he was buried in debt. We worked it out. We worked on a budget. We talked about God's will in his life and what he had planned for him, and he busted his hump. And he got done, which isn't the point of the story. He got out of debt, and then he decided, beyond what other tithe or giving that he would give to the church, that he wanted to give something special to people. Give. Just anonymously give. And so there are many characters, even in this sanctuary right now, that I've learned from about how they do that in the community. It's best to donate anonymously for our own pride's protection. It's best to do it as anonymously as possible. And so, over an 8-month period, Jeff had managed to save $800. And he took them all out in 50s, and he would keep them in his pocket. because he was waiting. I think we call them God sightings. You can call them all sorts of different things. He was waiting for God to let him know when the right time was. And he wanted to do it in the community. He wanted to do it for someone whose lights were going out, anything. And he was looking. Well, it was about this time of year it happened. He went out to eat, and he's not a good cooker, and he's single. So he went on Thanksgiving to eat. That's what single people do sometimes. They go out to eat on Thanksgiving, right? So he was out. And I'm going to tell you right now, I've studied waitressing and waiters as part of my sociology class. Nobody wants to work on Thanksgiving. Nobody. They have to work on Thanksgiving because they need to eat. And so Jeff was in there. He was looking around, and he saw this it looked like depressed, exhausted lady that was running around. Looked like she was in her 20s, running around, did what she needed to do, but exhausted. He began to hold a conversation with her and found out she was just frustrated with life. She had a kid. It was just really difficult. And so he thought, this is it. I'm going to leave the $800 here. And from a warning I had given him, I said, make sure you tell him it's hers and that you didn't just leave it, okay? I've seen that go wrong too. So she wrote on, he pulled out the envelope when she wasn't looking and said, this is for you. God said I was supposed to give this to you. Jeff. Okay, put it on an envelope, and he was waiting. And he waited for the right time. She went back in. He threw it on the table and ran. Didn't want her to, he just got out of that room. He had no interest in fame. He jumped out of that room and ran. Now, if you think the story is over, or you know where this is going, you're wrong. You can't make this stuff up. A couple of months later, Jeff was in the local grocery shop. Omaha is not that big. We think it is. It isn't. So a single man carrying a basket all of a sudden was assailed by a woman. The lady that he had given the money to saw him, ran over and gave him a big hug. Just bang, right on the side, gave him a big hug. And he said, I about dropped my basket. And he turns to her and remembers who she was. It's a memorable event when you drop money and run. Remember who she was, and he was waiting for her to tell him how many great things this money had saved, a great surgery she couldn't pay for, now she's healthy or something. She told him that she didn't spend a dime of his money. But she was so grateful for him. It was at a time in her life where she didn't believe God was listening to her. The world was just beating up and beating up. No one cared. No one wanted to listen. No one wanted to deal with her. And when he laid that money down and said, God said to come to you and do this, she goes, that has changed my life. And of course he followed up, well, where'd the money go then? What did you do with the money? She said, I knew someone who was really desperate in that restaurant that worked for us, who was a single mom with 3 kids. I knew they were struggling, so I just took the envelope and threw it on her table later that day. And you know what happened out of this? Honest truth. That was so impactful for the both of them. They are now both going to a small group together, not at our church, but they are going to church together. And to this very day, Jeff has a connection with the both of them. We have no idea the will of God sometimes. Our job is to recognize that in that daily bread he gives us, there's a portion for us, but also for the community around us, that God would do his will. Paul would never give you a number, ever. You find me in the New Testament where it says 10% this, 5% that. He would never use that. He would never use a billy club of the law. How dare you? You need to give, you dirty people. He would never do that because that's not the spirit of giving. That's not the heart of giving. It's when we realize that you deliver the goods of God to his people. If you could ride with me to deliver checks and food to people, it's amazing. I'm so happy to be a pastor for that reason alone. We get to see how God works in this world. As soon as you say 10%, you know what you do? You put a fence on everything. 5, you put a fence. 10, you put a fence. It could be 90% of your income that God has provided for others. Who knows? Until we know the will of God and you remember it is through you God delivers the goods. That's when you begin to beg to help. Jeff begs for God to show him the next one, because he's seen how God works through it. And so we move on to our last point, and verse 5. So begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in relief of the saints. It's a good thing to be a part of that. And this not as we expected. Paul is blown away. This is not what we expected out of them. We figured they would fight. But they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. First they found the will, then they reached out. They knew the order of stewardship. Now, the last verse we're going to cover is thus. Accordingly, we urge Titus. Now, Titus was sent before. He started this whole thing. He started the collection at the church. And so Paul's saying, dude, you started it, you finish it. We urge you, Titus, that just as you have started it, so he should complete it. So finish the job, will you? Because you know Titus. Titus knows this. That if you complete this collection, you know that this is an act of grace. Okay? Grace. What does grace mean? It's quiet, isn't it? We have a feeling or an idea, but what is grace? Undeserved. That's a good one. Undeserved. Unmerited. Undeserved. Divine assistance. There is nothing you do to deserve what you are given. Nothing. What can you show before God that you're worthy? Before someone who's perfect, all-powerful, all-knowledgeable? What do you have that he needs? Nothing. But out of his fatherly love and goodness, he provides this for you and through you to others. He chooses humanity for the sake of humanity. It is to our benefit in his folly. Because God's daily bread is an act of grace. You do not own a thing. Everyone in this room is expendable. That sounds hard, right? You are like a tube of toothpaste that God slowly expends throughout your life to give, to show, to proclaim. All that is yours is for the will of God. And when we know this, and we begin to see how it's worked in the world around us, we begin to beg. Just in chapter 9, just a few chapters ahead of this one. Each one must give as he has decided in his heart. Never some number. Please with that number. Not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. It's when we understand the heart of giving that we finish it out. Let's land the plane now. We got other things to do. God's provision is in his people. There is no shortage of bread, supplies in this world. It's not a supply issue, it's a distribution issue. There's plenty of garbage around to give to everyone. But when you let go of something, you let go of power. No matter what it is, if you have enough of it, it's worth something. It is when we realize that giving is a cooperation, operation. I wish we would cooperate with God. We struggle with that. It's a cooperation with the Holy Spirit in delivering the goods and delivering the promises to his people, that we begin to understand the heart of giving. That he works through the world through you. And that's when the dam breaks. The dams just break. And grace flourishes here on earth. If you could remember one thing out of this whole thing, ears up, as I'm done. If you remember one thing, remember this. Giving is about cooperating with the Spirit and delivering the goods, the promises to his children. I'm going to say it one more time so that you walk out and say, what did you talk about today? You're going to go, this. Giving is about cooperating with the Spirit and delivering the goods, the promises of God to his people, and not through the daily bread. And all of you have been given. To some little, to some much. Let us pray.